What if you were to find out that Jerusalem is really part of Ethiopia and not part of the land that they renamed Israel? What would you do? Well, let's find out. How amiable are thy tabernacles, O Lord of hosts! My soul longeth, yea, even fainteth for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Don't forget, the real God said he will live amongst his people. Yea, the sparrow have found a house, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young. Even thy altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. In other words, the King of all kings is God himself. Blessed are they that dwell in thy house. They will be still praising thee. Selah. Highly Selassie. They go from strength to strength. Every one of them in Zion appeareth before God. In other words, the real God, the God of hosts, O God of Jacob, Selah, is in Zion. He appeareth in Zion. So who's the king of Zion? Let's watch.
He became governor of a province. In 1928, he led the troops that killed Empress Zavitu's husband, who was not of royal blood, and became regent. He became emperor on November 2nd, 1930, and was crowned Haile Selassie I, King of Kings, King of Zion.
So the living God was crowned King of Zion. And who's the living God?
Conquering lion of the seed of Judah, power of the Trinity.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. So let's watch. It seems certain that classical historians and geographers call the whole region from India to Egypt, both countries inclusive, by the name of Ethiopia. In other words, an Egyptian and an Indian, and every country in between India and Egypt was Ethiopians. In other words, the entire Middle East was called Ethiopia. So are you not as the sons of Ethiopia to me, O sons of Israel? Another Bible will say, are you not as the sons of Ethiopians to me, O sons of Israel, declares the Lord. So let's watch.
They taught us to see India and Ethiopia as separate worlds, but ancient memory says otherwise. Long before borders and renaming, the motherland stretches as one, the original Ethiopia, the eastern arm of the landmass. What we now call India is suppressed histories and oral traditions. India was known as Eastern Ethiopia, a reflection of one people, one culture, and one ether frequency spanning the entire earth. The Ganges River, sacred in India, echoes the highland
Ganges is an Ethiopian king.
Rivers of Africa, trade routes, myths, and temples mirrored each other. Names have shifted, but the memory lives on. When you reclaim the link between India and Ethiopia, you break the mental spell of separation. You see not nations, but a single cradle of humanity. This is the story they don't want you to know.
Who don't want you to know?
Plantation owner in West Africa. The biggest plantation owner in West Africa owns Sabrina Carpenter and Ariana Grande. She's owned by the same people as Drake, Kendrick, Katy Perry, The Weeknd, Jay-Z, Rihanna. They're all owned and controlled by a Universal Music Group. Sabrina's early life is that she's a humble Jewish girl from America. She was a Disney actor. Ariana Grande, another child actress, credits Kabbalah for her success. Lucian Grange is the CEO of UMG. Kanye said that Lucian was a puppet master. UMG is majority owned by Vincent Bollorez, whose family comes from the banking Rothschild Goldschmidt dynasty through his grandmother, who worked as a secret service liaison between France and Israel. His father was childhood friends with Edmund de Rothschild and Antoine Bernheim. Bernheim credited as the sole person who built his biggest company. That's the reason he's rich. He owns 39% of Sockfin, which is the company that uses the same plantations as King Leopold and a bunch in West Africa. The other half of the company is owned by his friends from the Fabry family, primary manager of the Belgian bank, and a top shareholder of the Mendelssohn Family Bank. They own 100% of Valore Africa, which controls all of the imports and exports in Africa.
All. Isn't that crazy? All. So let's watch.
Became the majority from nature. Knows no described in Europe before Ashkenazis became the majority from nature. Knows no color line by J.A. Rogers, page 123. Quote, Waite says, an interesting gradation of all shades down to the black is exhibited by the Jews. Especially dark were the Jews of Spain and Portugal. The Portuguese Jews were very dark, says Pritchard. The Duchess de Brante, wife of Napoleon's ambassador to Portugal, said that the Jew, the Negro, and the Portuguese could be seen in a single person. So dark were the Jews, especially of Portugal and southern Spain, that many whites thought all Jews were black or dark. Another source can be found from The Natural History of Man by James Cowles Pritchard. Quote, the Jews of Portugal are very dark. More corroborating evidence can be found from the memoirs of the secret services of John Mackay, Esquire, published in 1733. Daniel, Earl of Nottingham, Secretary of State, is eldest son to Mr. Finch, Lord Chancellor in the reign of King Charles II. He hath also the exterior air of business and application, enough to make him very capable.
Notice he said 1737. In other words, when the transatlantic slave trade began, it was done by black kings and queens of Europe. In other words, blacks were enslaving blacks, just that they repainted them white today. So you have no idea who they initially came from. But thank God we have the first book of Maccabean, also known as the first book of Maccabees. And it warned us who they are. So after Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, who came from the land of Kittim, defeated Darius, king of the Persians and the Medes. In other words, the Medes are Iraq and Syria. So the king of Greece is now controlling Iran, Iraq, and Syria. He's also controlling Rome, which is part of the kingdom of the Greeks. He's also controlling Jerusalem. So they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the Gentile custom. And they plundered the land of Egypt, which is also part of Ethiopia. In other words, they took over Ethiopia. Then they fortified the city of David with a great strong wall and strong towers, and it became their citadel. It became an ambush against the sanctuary and an evil adversary of Israel continually. In other words, Jerusalem is not in the place that they call Israel. Is literally the total opposite of where Jerusalem is supposed to be. So what did they build in Jerusalem? They spent $1.1 billion or $3.5 billion to make a 30-foot concrete wall. In other words, pay attention. The place they call Israel, the whole history of the place they call Israel started in 1948. And don't forget what it told us in the first book of Maccabees. And whosoever would do according to the commandment of the king, he should die, where he is to his whole kingdom. So he forsook the Lord, so they committed evils in the land. And whosoever was found with the book of Testament, remember the original Bible was in one testament. So they builded the city of David with a great and strong wall and a stronghold for his towers, and they put therein a sinful nation with the spoils of Jerusalem, for it was a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary and an evil adversary to Israel. So let's read what a real Zion is. Jehovah is more in love with the gates of Zion, with the gates of Zion than with all the tabernacles of Jacob. Glorious things are being spoken about you, O city of the true God. In other words, the true God represents Ethiopia. With Cush, this one was born there, and respecting Zion, it will be said, each and every one was born in her, and the Most High himself will firmly establish her. Therefore, when they go to the mountains of Israel, they're really going into Ethiopia. For in the beginning, the entire region was called Ethiopia. So follow God, not man.